Okay, guys, I just wanted to review one last TEK, which is 5.3L, and that is the division of a whole number by a unit fraction and the division of a unit fraction by a whole number, but just with the standard algorithm without the models. Okay, so remember just remember these three words: keep, change, flip, and that helps us to know what to do whenever we are doing that. So I have these two examples here, and one of them starts with a whole number, one of them starts with a unit fraction. But we have the same whole number and the same unit fraction in both problems, but they will give us different answers. So if you'll remember, I said this over and over and over again at school. You start with a whole number, you should end with a whole number. You start with a unit fraction, you should end with a unit fraction. And so that is one easy way to always get these questions right. The problem is that when you read the word problem, knowing, do I start with the whole number or do I start with the unit fraction? So here's an example of what this problem may sound like. So if you had 2 divided by 1/5. Your problem might say, Miss Cooley or Miss Calmis or whoever bought 2 pounds of meat for hamburgers. She plans to use 1/5 of the meat for each burger. How many burgers will she be able to make? So she's starting with 2 pounds and she wants to divide it by 1/5 because each burger is going to be 1/5 of a pound. We want to know how many burgers can we make out of these 2 pounds. So we previously talked about a model. You could draw 2 hamburgers, divide them into fifths. How many parts will you have? But we're going to focus on just the standard algorithm, which would be keep, change, flip. So what that means is our first step would be to turn our whole number into a fraction. And like I previously said in some of the other videos, to do that, you would just make 1 the denominator because 2 over 1 is the same thing as 2. And then we would keep, change, flip. I like to rewrite it right under my original problem just to keep everything all lined up. So we would keep 2 over 1, so that's where the keep comes from. Then change. We would change the division sign to the opposite of division, which is multiplication, and then flip. Flip means we want to flip our unit fraction. So our unit fraction is 1 over 5. We're going to flip that, and it would become 5 over 1. And at this point, all we are doing is multiplying. And remember, to multiply, we just multiply straight across. So 2 times 5 is 10, and 1 times 1 is 1. And so we end up with 10 over 1, which is equivalent to just 10. And just like I said, we started with a whole number, and so we ended up with a whole number. She would be able to make 10 hamburgers, and they would be 1/5 of a pound each. And you've noticed, and we talked about this at school, what are you actually doing is you're actually multiplying because you keep, change, flip. So if you remember that if we started with a whole number and you had 2 and you had 5, all you're really doing is multiplying 2 times 5, which is 10. Okay, so now let's talk about the opposite. What about if we start with a unit fraction, we divide it by a whole number? We've already looked at the model. So we're kind of talking about this same problem here about hamburger meat. Say we only have 1/5 of a pound of meat and we want to divide it equally between 2 people into 2 different burgers. How many pounds or what fraction of a pound is each hamburger going to be? We only have 1/5 of a pound of meat. That's all we have. That's what we're starting with. We're dividing it between 2 people or between 2 hamburgers. How much is each hamburger going to weigh? So this time we're starting with, again, the unit fraction. So doesn't matter if you start with a unit fraction or a whole number, you're still going to keep, change, flip, okay? So that means we would keep 1/5. Again, we would change our division sign to the opposite, which is multiplication. And then our 2, if we're turning 2 into a fraction, would look like 2 over 1, but I want to flip that. And so if I flip 2 over 1, flip to 1 over 2, and then I would just multiply straight across. 1 times 1 is 1, and 5 times 2 is 10. And so I end up with 1/10. So I started with 1/5 of a pound of hamburger meat. I was making 2 hamburgers, so each one of those hamburgers would be 1/10 of a pound. And again, like I said, you start with a unit fraction, you end with a unit fraction. So we started with 1/5 and we're dividing it by 2. You would have just multiplied. Okay, 5 times 2 is 10, but it can't equal 10 because you're starting with a unit fraction, so you end with a unit fraction. So it's not 10, but it is 1/10. So the easiest way to remember it is just I'm starting with a whole number, I end with a whole number. If I'm starting with a unit fraction, I end with a unit fraction. And honestly, that's just the easiest way to remember it. So we had 2 problems that had the same whole number, the same unit fraction, but they had different answers. 10 is not the same thing as 1/10, and that's how they try to trick you on a problem. Is they would have 10 and 1/10 both as answer choices, and you would have to know, do you start with a whole number or do you start with a unit fraction? Hope that helps you.